So up next, I'm very excited to introduce Forjindam, Chief Development Officer at Mycotoo, and recently named among the top 50 theme park influencers by Blooloop.
Hello, everyone. Hi, how are you? How are you? Yay, good. Thank you so much for having me here. And I think one of the most exciting things that I've found in talking to people, not just last night and today, but just in our industry, themed entertainment, is just getting a sense of how people came to where they were in their career, how they landed in these roles of leadership, and really what their path and their journey has been. And it's been very nuanced. Everyone has an accidental stumble into it, which I very much relate to. Me personally, I come from a theater background, moved to Los Angeles because I experienced my last winter in New York. And so, like any good actress, I figured LA is the place to go. I'm going to start a career in entertainment. So what do? You get a job on Craigslist. So that's exactly what I did. As a matter of fact, Mary Clough, who's somewhere in here, gave me my very first job in themed entertainment as an assistant. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to be around amazingly talented veterans in our industry who have given me lots of information and really been a safety net in terms of my career and helping me grow. So you can imagine that even with that sort of pedigree, the shock that I had when I realized my knee-jerk reaction when I was approached about talking about leadership and technology. My first reaction was, I'm not in IT, I'm not Steve Jobs, so this is clearly a mistake, right? Just a show of hands, who here has ever received an email that they were 100% certain they were not supposed to be copied on? Show of hands. Right? It's awkward. It's very uncomfortable, and it's that feeling of, should I tell them? Should I not? Should I just pretend like my email's not buried in there? What do? So it's that fear that sort of was my first reaction, that feeling of not me. I shouldn't be speaking of this. But like every true post-Gen Xer, pre-millennial, I did what we always do when we're faced with terror. We Google search, right? We take to the internet to figure out answers and at least give us a little bit of information to understand how we're going to be moving forward. So what I did was I went online and I said, all right, I'm just going to look up the top influencers, or rather the top leaders, around the world. That was my Google search. And this is what came up. Kid you not. This smorgasbord of testosterone and activism and political influencers and lots of failed businesses and, dictatorship is what came up as the top leaders around the world. And then, shout out to Margaret Thatcher, Iron Grit over there, but that was it. That was pretty much it. So I know what you're thinking. You're saying, all right, well, your search was too broad. You said top leaders around the world. You need to narrow it down a bit. And for the sake of this conversation, because we are themed entertainment, why don't we make it more relevant to the creative industry? So I did that. I decided that I was going to go onto the Themed Entertainment Association website, which we're all familiar with, and I looked up 150, give or take, companies that are registered. So I did my own sort of research from those companies, and these are suppliers, operators, service providers. I did my research to just, go to their website and say, who's their leadership? Who do they consider the executive level representation? And this chart just sort of gives you a picture of what I came up. And again, this is my research. I'm sure there's extensive data that could go further deeper, but just at a first glance, 39% shown as women in executive level. So that's chief operating, chief marketing, chief awesome, whichever. 35% non-white, and I put specifically Asian, Hispanic, because again, for the sake of just first glance and not delving too much deeper. And 75% African American or Black. And this is not okay. This is the picture of our industry. We are supposed to be a reflection of our guests, storytellers that are creating environments that, as Rick Proctor yesterday was talking about the purple place, right? Not red, not blue, purple. Entertainment. Everyone is welcome. We are a reflection of our audience, and yet what we're telling ourselves, or what we're telling our interns and our associates and the people who are coming into our industry, is that some of you might not fit. And so then, of course, I took it one step further, and, just for kicks, I decided to look up Cameroonian, and 0.01%. So if anyone is doing a 23andMe survey and they find some history of West African in there, please let me know, because that number could use a bump. But that aside, it was interesting because for me, here I am, I'm an MFA graduate, I've traveled the world, I've been fortunate enough to have a door open and work my way up to be the head of sales and marketing for an Inc. 500 entertainment development company. And my first reaction is, I don't fit in. And I don't think I'm alone in that sentiment. The feeling of understanding where your role is, how you impact others, and are you up to the challenge? And if you are, is it presumptuous? Is it confidence? Is it ego? So, as part of my process of wanting to get a little bit underneath why I felt that, I thought I'd take a step back, really look at, instead of painting the picture of who's in front of me now, who are the people in my past and in my journey that have gotten me to where I am today? Who are the people who have inspired and sort of planted that seed of leadership for me? So if I may, going way back, that little girl on the left of your screen is me. And in the middle, that's me and my sister. We were cosplay pioneers before it was a thing, y'all. And as the chart showed before, I'm from Cameroon, so that was my interest in it. And the first time I came to the US was in 1986. I was 5 years old. My arrival to the United States of America was Epcot. So you can imagine the sort of bar that was set in terms of what America meant, right? But that aside, it was fun. It was imagination. It was exciting. There was a lot of story that was being told. And I have a lot of people to thank for that. Because for this 80s girl, this was it for me. It was Whitney Houston, it was Dynasty, it was Ursula, and because we were fortunate enough to have a satellite dish, Oprah and Christiane Amanpour were my life, because CNN International was really the only international news outlet we had. This was the picture of my world in terms of influences. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that my parents didn't have an important part to do with that. See, my mother, an entrepreneur in her own right, was a successful businesswoman. She owned a chain of grocery stores in Cameroon that sold specifically British and British and American products. So your Snickers, your Mars, which everyone here takes for granted, but for us, that Christmas was every day, right? Being able to have a Mars bar. So she was a pioneer in her own right. She was traveling to China to do business before it was considered smart business. She was traveling to cut out the middleman, and she was doing things that were ahead of her time. So in my eyes, before I even knew that this was a word, she was a feminist. My father was an engineer, very different mindset. He was about protocol, cause and effect. He stumbled onto a smaller company and took it from a fledgling failing business of less than 5 people, where we would come with him every day and on Saturdays and watch him tire away trying to get new business, and was able to grow it up to over 2,000 people. It was a naval engineering company. They were making billions of dollars in revenue. And for a West African country, that was considered not normal. So a lot of people paid attention. And a lot of government leaders paid attention. And because, of course, there's a culture of corruption, a lot of government leaders expected that he would go the same route. It wasn't until 2008 that everything came to a crash and my life came to a stumbling halt. I was here. It was my first official year into themed entertainment. I was still an assistant, but I was figuring out where I wanted to be in the world of leisure. And I was informed that my father was imprisoned. It wouldn't be until 4 years later that he would be charged for a crime he did not commit, and he would be sentenced to life. He is a political prisoner at the moment, and he has been. And he was essentially stripped of his leadership. And so I'm faced with a dilemma. I'm faced in 2008 with the question of, how do I pursue this notion of storytelling and entertainment and still have this very gut-wrenching reality that's existing. It's a conflict. It almost feels like unfair and a little bit of a cop-out. I should stop everything and go back to fighting the good fight. And that brings me to this question about the difference between leadership and leadability. And I'm not going to assume that people don't have their sort of filters on how they approach it. We definitely saw an amazing video of people's perspectives on leadership and what it means to them. What I would like to do is focus more on things that resonate with me, because I think at the end of the day, it starts with your personal connection, and then talk about leadability more as an execution. So leadership, to me, is a vision. It's a core belief, a principle, a conviction towards an approach, an adoption of why. What's your story? What's at the core of what you are doing? Leadability is how. It's the tools, it's the theming, it's the decoration, it's technology, it's how we actually get our vision across. And if done successfully, can be a really wonderful marriage. And then I started thinking of some of the sort of tenets that I apply to leadership. And again, you may disagree, and that's fine. I think that's part of the dialogue. But for me, it starts with vision over circumstance and looking at the environment. Where are you as a brand? Where are you as an individual, as a company? Does your vision for your company reflect your circumstance? And that can be good or bad. If you're a startup and you are constantly in the red, as Kirsty was talking about earlier, where do you see your growth? What's the story that you're telling in the parks or in the attractions or experiences that you're developing? And how does that story reflect who you are as a brand and as a company? So I highlighted some of the people that I think are important to me and have a very strong connection to. And I wanted to focus more on their origin story rather than who they are. So the lady on the left, Shonda Rhimes, that was when she was in grad school, probably had no idea that later on she would be voted one of Time's 100 influential people and running 3 consecutive shows that have 100 episodes each. Not bad. And then I particularly love the newspaper clipping of a young lady from my alma mater, Columbia University, and they were so proud, Columbia, because they had just hired a new full-time woman professor. It was such an accomplishment. And little did they know that she would go on to become Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And then I particularly like the story of Claire Karaszewski, the lady in the white coat. She is now the first neurosurgeon in Rwanda. But what people don't know is that she was a survivor of the genocide. Circumstance does not impact your vision, or shouldn't impact your vision. And that's strong to me. The next thing is, what do we stand for? And this is an interesting question because especially in the climate that we are at now, it's not about your unwillingness to shake your principles, but rather your conviction to stand by your principles in spite of everything, but still listen to others, right? Listen to the environment. And so I'm going to put 2 case studies in front of you. One, Pepsi. We all know it. This is nothing against Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, but they chose a route. They said the climate is a certain way. We are going to do an ad campaign that highlights our understanding of Black Lives Matter or the uprising or people who are angry about police violence. We're going to sell Pepsi with a model socialite named Kendall Jenner. The other ad, Nike, also recognizing an opportunity in the political climate to capitalize on it, decided we're going to step back. We're going to listen, and we are going to use the voice of someone who, for good or bad, whether you like him or not, has been the face of this controversy for quite some time. Colin Kaepernick. Both had backlash. Both brands have endless access to money and funding, so there's no lack of resources. Definitely use technology, online marketing, and media strategies to get their message out. But the backlash of one resulted in Pepsi pulling their ad and basically backpedaling and apologizing. And the backlash of the other, with burned shoes all over the internet, and I'm sure you've seen them, resulted in them doubling down and saying, yeah, we believe in this, we're going to stand by it, and here are other activists that we want to showcase. So what do you stand for? Next question is passion. And I love that Kirsty was talking about, what is your passion? And understanding that is critical and it drives our vision. But I would add on to that and say, is it passion and does it have a bigger purpose? Because there's lots of people who are excited about things. There's lots of leaders that are very, very passionate about their countries, about their policies, about their brands, about their execution strategies, about their products. And I just want to give two examples here that highlight that difference between passion and bigger purpose. So you have Martin Shkreli, now infamous for being the farmer bro, if anyone has heard. He was head of a hedge fund that decided to raise the prices on a pharmaceutical drug by like 400% and smiled about it. And then on the right, you have a 16-year-old. She's 19 now, but she was 16 at the time. One of the stars featured in a recent documentary called Inventing Tomorrow. Her name is Sahiti, and she has been tirelessly working out of her house in Bangalore on an app to help identify pollutants in her neighborhood, because she sees firsthand the results of phosphate suds that are sort of taking over their landscape and the pollutants that are a result of that. So she's developed an app on her own that now governments and crowdsourcing communities are using to be able to leverage some of their movements. Both passionate, but one has a different purpose. And you can decide which one's bigger or the other, but it's very clear. The last bit is the notion of facing a dilemma. And I just sort of get to cut to the chase of it is, can you let go? As leaders, as developers, as artists, can we let go of our idea and allow our teams to sort of run with it and take it on? And I believe someone yesterday was talking about cascading the ideas. I believe it was John Lizzie. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but this notion of how do we allow and empower our teams to spread the gospel? This made me think of something similar. So recently I was at Kaboo Del Mar Festival, and we were staying with family friends, and they have teenagers who are learning to drive. And let me, disclaimer saying I have an 8.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old, so the notion of driving is so foreign to me, because I'm pretty sure with the advent of automated vehicles, they're not going to have to drive. They may not even have to learn how to write. They'll just be swiping left and right. But that aside, I watched firsthand as they were, teaching their son how to drive. And I got to witness in the car as their son with a learner's permit was, stepping on those brakes and making those sharp turns. And afterwards, my heart was literally racing. And afterwards, I asked the mom and I said, how do you do it? How can you let him do that and drive and not be so nervous and just stay calm? And she said, we've done all we can. We've taught him how to be responsible, and hopefully we've done our job right enough to know that these are the consequences of your actions if you step on the brakes or if you text while driving and all these other things. And I had a little epiphany at that moment, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of like the workplace. When we think of leadership, why don't we empower our employees or our coworkers with the tools to drive? And then why is it so much harder to let go? And this image came to mind. This is a classic photo that we've seen. I pulled this off of a popular Tumblr page called Hovering Art Directors. And again, if you haven't seen it, please check it out. It's a series of, designers and maybe a lot of times more than one person hovering and giving direction and not letting go. And I thought, okay, that's brilliant, because that's kind of the reflection of where we're at. And actually, this was so successful that merchandise was created out of that from an ad campaign with Adobe that was super successful. But I digress. The point being that the art of letting go is a dilemma, because it requires us to trust the message, the dialogue, the ethos, the brand, the story that we're telling, and give our coworkers the tools to be able to continue with that. And so it comes back to that question I heard earlier of, if you're not in the office, what is your team doing? And do you care? Do you put in the systems to allow them to connect with each other or share their concerns if there is a problem? Which then leads me to our next beat, which is leadability. So if leadership is our core and our vision and our story, the why, leadability to me is the how and the what. It's the technology that we use as a tool to be able to share that information, to get people on board. And there's different ways to look at this, of course. I wanted to focus on one specific, which was an experience that just recently happened. So at South by Southwest earlier this year, which, as everyone knows, is one of the premier gatherings for film, television, technology, HBO, in anticipation of season 2, decided that they wanted to have an experience to promote the arrival of their new season for Westworld. They didn't know what it was going to be, but they knew that they wanted to, quote, win South by Southwest. And so they decided to build Westworld. And what this was a walkthrough experience that had actors populated, that was fully scripted and immersive, which is one of those overused words now. But it was as immersive gets, in the sense of, if you came as a guest, you were in Westworld, you were surrounded by actors in costume, you were interacting, there was games, there were scavenger hunts, there were hidden quests. You could have stayed for 9 hours or you could have stayed for an hour, it was your choice, but there was a sense of freedom and discovery. And it was very well received. It had over 1.9 billion impressions, but the takeaway from this that had really connected with me was a quote that I saw on Forbes, which was, technology doesn't replace human experience of being somewhere special. It just makes us crave it more, which I thought was interesting, right? Technology is a tool to allow us to share a story, but at the end of the day, we want to share those as people, through social experiences. We want to have something that's authentic and true to who we are. So the next bit for technology that I want to talk on is technology as a facilitator for culture. You know, how do we create a culture of sharing? Network organization isn't just about hoarding information, it's about facilitating and spreading the doctrine, as we've been talking about. So this top-down model that a lot of times we see, this, and pardon my French, this cover your ass sort of culture, is that effective? Is it leading by a vision, a one person, a sort of singular filter? Or is there an opportunity to share ideas? You know, we always talk about in our industry, in creative spaces, there's no such thing as a bad idea, just the really, really, really bad ones. How do we empower and encourage anyone to feel like they have a voice at the table? And it isn't just about listening to it, but is it implemented afterwards? Is it incorporated into the company manifesto? Is it incorporated into the creative experience? These are all things that are important and they matter and they send a big message. Innovative companies thrive when employees throughout the company make and own their decisions. That's a Netflix manifesto. And I would argue that a lot of innovative companies that have sort of become the beacon have that similar approach. The next thing is looking at technology as a vehicle for diversity. And I say this with a lot of conviction. Having one other is not enough. If you look at your meetings, if you look around the table and there's one black person or one woman or one Muslim, and you can pick whatever description you want, that's not enough, and it's not diversity. And even though this is about technology, I would argue that, thank you. I would argue that technology should be the vehicle to be able to encourage diversity, not the restrictor. So experience designers should represent our guests. We should be the tableau of who we're trying to connect with. So diversity in decision makers and content makers isn't just about the consumers, isn't just about creating products that diverse audiences can enjoy. It's about creating content that a diverse audience can feel empowered by and excited by. Experience access is a design and build experience for a diverse audience. And I've said this, but I'll just harp on it again. Technology is a tool, you know, for communication, for recruitment, for rethinking how we use technology in itself. You know, diversity isn't just always over race and gender or creed or sexual orientation. Sometimes it's more of a gut check, right? And we've seen statistics about this, and I won't bog you down with them, but we know, like Diversity Inc., for example, did a study where companies committed to diversity outperform peers by 25%. Using technology as a way to recruit in how we are describing new jobs that are coming in is also part of the thinking. Using technology to market our ethos, to market our communications, to market our platform. These are part of how we reach out and how we diversify. So as proud as we are about our leadership and the people who have come before us, it's less about patting ourselves on the back and saying, we still have work to do. There's still a lot more that can be done in outreach, in recruitment of younger kids out of college or high school, in how we communicate entertainment, and specifically themed entertainment, and its value and mandate in the current culture and climate, which I would argue is needed now more than ever. So I'd like to come back to this image because it's still the same. They've changed a little bit and some have passed on, but I think the core of who they are and why they were so important to me at the time still remains true. And I'd like to come back to my father because I know I put a huge statement out there. And while he is still a political prisoner, and there have been lots of attempts on his life, as you can tell, I continued on in entertainment. And if anything, it gave me more resolve to find my voice in this community and to use what we do, which is making other people happy, as a cathartic, resource for me. And even in the moment of being stripped of his leadership, being removed from his position and not having any power, quote unquote, he was still able in prison to start an organization that was about educating and increasing literacy in the prison, which was about providing movie night to people who never get to watch movies or haven't watched them in 20 years. And these movies showcase empowering content about people around the world who are making a difference, just to bring a little light to their eyes. Now, it's not a Nobel Prize, but to me, that's leadership. It's circumstance that is not of an issue and vision that plows through that. And I still take that with me. So I would like to then end on a quote that I think is really resonant with me and hopefully has the same connection with you. And it's from the author of The Little Prince, which is, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the people to gather wood or divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Let's empower the next generation to be diverse, to be innovative, to take risks on our account and to tell an authentic story. But let's do it by inclusion. Let's use technology as a vehicle to have that inclusion. And let's be excited about what we do. Thank you.